Welcome back. I'm your narrator, Chad. In the last episode, Sam and Case were still reeling from a horrible accident at the sleep clinic. After leaving Runnels, Sam and Case catch up. We last left Sam entering a waking nightmare with the lingering stench of seared eyeballs still in his nostrils. This episode, another enters the fray. This is Episode 6, Chapter 8 of No Evil. Let's escape. The sound of a single telephone echoed through an empty office as Tate O'Byrne prepared for his first call of the night. He pulled on his headset, took a deep breath before answering. A woman on the other line was wheezing. She inhaled deeply, then launched into a tirade. A printer tonight, he thought. It was always a simple fix, always the same mind-numbing script. For the most part, people were grateful for the help, but Tate couldn't help but focus on the nasties like this. They were the souls most lost, frustrated by their own lack of comprehension but without the tools to correct it. He truly pitied the people who called. How boring must it be to live a life without even the mental capacity to properly install a printer? Tate didn't care to know. A life so clearly vapid wasn't worth knowing about. Unfortunately, his contact with just such lives was inevitable. And have you tried unplugging the machine and then plugging it back in, ma'am? It's never been plugged in? Tate cracked his knuckles. Systematically, he moved each of his thumbs, index, and middle fingers in succession until he'd done it 3 times. Then he balled up his fists, snapping them all at once. Now the driver, the program that makes it print, is installed automatically. Yes, I'll wait on the line. He chewed at his fingernails, tearing them right to left, then spitting them across his cubicle into the opposite corner. Oh, that's great. Is there anything else I can help you with tonight? Okay, thank you for calling Tech Care, he said, fake enthusiasm spewing from his mouth like verbose puke. When the call finished, Tate typed up the details. He let out a sigh knowing it would probably be a while before his next call, if one even came. He started work at 5 and people rarely called later than 6. Tech Care was a very small call center. It consisted of about 20 workstations and rented space above a martial arts studio. It was a concept pitched by some city dirtbag. Tate had seen him in the paper once trying to convince the town council it was the answer to their economic woes. Tate remembered the photo showing the man in his imposing build, tall and thick, his mouth smiling but his eyes selling snake oil. Tech Care's creator called it hyper-local support. It would offer customer service outside of regular business hours, and local businesses could keep up with the large corporations in that respect. That was the pitch anyway. The Town Business Improvement Association bought in hard, with Mr. Snake Oil selling them his system for a hefty $50,000. Tech Care now handled support calls for a group of 17 local businesses, everything from hardware stores to bookshops. A lot of people in town thought the service was a joke, which of course it was. Most of the town's population was 50 or above, and weren't likely to phone a call center in any case. By the time local businesses realized the system was nothing more than an open-source spreadsheet, it was too late. Mr. Snake Oil was on his way to Cabo. Their only choice was to try to make it work. While he'd known the full story before he applied for the job, and knew it wasn't likely to last, Tate interviewed anyway. They were offering more than he'd been making selling his art, and a steady paycheck would at least help him make the rent. He volunteered to work the evening shift, hoping it would help his case. It did. He waited for another call, wasting the minutes away by clicking through news websites. Down the rabbit hole he went. He glanced at the clock and was surprised to see 3 hours had gone by without a call. He sat back in his chair, rubbed his eyes, and began tapping out a beat on his desk. Sometimes Tate thought he hated being around other people, which of course was part of what attracted him to the job in the first place. He suspected it would be quiet, and it was. People made him uncomfortable more than anything. He couldn't relax. It was exhausting to be in public. However, on winter nights like tonight, when the sun disappeared before 5 and the cold was ferocious, he would feel so miserable and alone he wanted to die. That was always the way for him, the crushing duality. The job was always boring, and the boredom never failed to bring on that desperate feeling. Tate would wish for anyone to come in, for anyone to call, The office would seem to taunt him with oppressive silence. Then, when the silence seemed to close in all around him like dense fog, he'd hear the old building settle and snap. His heart would rattle and thump hard, and he'd inspect every corner of the office before slinking back to his cubicle in shame. He was determined to avoid that dance tonight. Tate tossed his headset aside and spun in his computer chair. His cubicle, not unlike the entire office, was stark. The color was beige, the carpet gray, and the walls were barren. They swirled into one monochromatic pool. He twirled around from his desk and pushed himself in his chair to the far corner, reached into a canvas backpack and pulled out a thick paperback book. The edges of the cover were bent and creased, the pages the color of brown mustard. His main distraction from his own irrational fear was books. He usually devoured fantasies, but every now and then he'd settle for a good biography. No pop idols or celebrities, nothing like that. He was more interested in influential leaders. With just himself in the office and not many phone calls, Tate could often get through a new book every 2 weeks or so, a few days if it was really good. He was one of the regulars at the town library, and he often split his leisure time between there and his studio. The ringer volume was on its highest setting, the doors were locked, and Tate settled into his computer chair. He leaned back and cracked open the book. He quickly skimmed through it, finding his place about 2/3 of the way through. It was divided into sections, each one detailing the notable exploits of various world leaders. He was midway through a particularly enthralling section on Thatcher. Tate didn't care much about politics. Policy decisions and international rhetoric weren't what he was after. He wanted to understand the people. There was a drive, an almost arrogant quality about them. It was a feeling that they understood what was best for an entire country of people and made them believe it was true. That was intriguing to Tate because he'd always somewhat felt that. Whether it was school or work, he always believed he could be the best if he wanted. Thatcher had been a trained chemist and studied law before getting into politics. That motivation and the power to see it through was what Tate was compelled to understand. Tate powered through the chapter and moved on to the next. By the time he finished the book, the clock read 11:45. He set it down, rubbed his tired eyes again, and rolled out of his cubicle. He could see through the windows across the room it had begun to snow. Not a lot, but enough that he could see flecks of white float past the main street lights. Too much coffee before work. He got up and headed to the bathroom. He finished and zipped up his pants. The bathroom looked like it had been left untouched for the last 30 years and behaved like it. The toilet barely flushed his piss and the taps all made a noise like a rusty gate when he turned them on. He finished washing up, turned, and stopped. What is that? The sound was faint. It reminded Tate of the wobbly wub-wub-wub of flexing sheet metal. Then there was a loud thump and scream. Tate crouched in the bathroom as if someone were shooting at him. His heart hammered. Still crouching, he cautiously exited the bathroom. The office was set up with the cubicles divided into 5 rows of 4. These took up most of the west side of the space. In the northeast corner was a foyer with a pair of coat racks and stairs leading up from the martial arts studio. One set of doors led into the main office room, another to a narrow hallway on the east side of the building, really only an annexed portion of the foyer, and behind the washrooms. The washrooms were originally about double in size, but were divided when Tech Care leased the office space, a concession granted so the martial arts studio and the office could maintain private facilities. Looking toward the foyer, he couldn't see any movement, although only one bank of lights above his cubicle had been left on. He wandered the office, crouching and listening. Nothing. He got to the foyer and tried the door leading downstairs. Locked. The door leading to the hallway was also locked. Tate listened again. For a moment he thought maybe the sound had stopped, and then turned to head back to the washroom to make sure. Wub wub. Wub 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 wub. Wub wub. Another scream. Tate realized the sound was coming from a vent above the sink. He used one knee as leverage and pulled himself on top of the counter, placed his ear against the vent and listened. The sound was clearly coming from the martial arts studio washrooms. Probably an animal. This place is a shithole. Wub wub wub. He leaned back from the vent, extended his leg to find his footing, and didn't. He reeled backward off the counter, briefly getting his feet underneath him before his momentum carried him ass first into the floor. His back slammed hard against the stall and the sound filled the room. The stalls were cheap and thin. If you pressed on the side, they'd flex and warble a tinny song. Tate had just put a man-sized dent in the door of one of them. Shit. The noise from the other washroom stopped, and Tate imagined he'd just scared the nuts off some squirrel living in there. Feeling as pathetic and shameful as ever, he slugged back to his desk. The room seemed darker now, and the wind had picked up outside. The light of the computer screen caught his face, showing dark, sagging circles under his eyes. He pulled up another news site and clicked through the stories again. Then he clicked the red X in the corner and pushed away the keyboard in disgust. He walked over to a filing cabinet, purposefully moving up the row of cubicles and approaching it from the furthest side rather than past the washrooms. He pulled out a form with work order and bold lettering at the top, walked back to his desk and began to write. On the form he described the incident in minute detail to send along to the landlord with his apologies. He was pressing so hard on the pen the tip began to poke through the back of the page. He paused to think, began a new sentence, and then stopped instantly when he heard the front door unlock. He wheeled his computer chair away from the desk and investigated the narrow hallway leading to the front door. The light in the foyer was on. His cubicle was in the fourth row back from the foyer door and the second closest to the wall. From the back corner of the building he could never see who was coming or going through the foyer, but this was unusual. His eyes turned away from the open doorway to the time in the top right corner of the computer screen. Small black letters showed it was 11:55. "Hello?" Tate probed into unresponsive darkness. He ran his fingers through his wiry red hair. A solution of sweat and day-old style wax coated it, and he wiped both hands on his pants before pushing out of his seat and walking to the hallway to see who had come in. He couldn't see anyone in the main office. From where he stood, the sea foam green curtain at the foyer door was closed and seemed undisturbed from where he had left it. He meandered again through the small partitioned workspaces, making sure nobody was there. He reached the foyer door and again gave it a shove to make sure the deadbolt was engaged. He nearly toppled down the stairs when it swung open. "Damn!" Clutching the door handle for balance, he pushed himself back to stability. He closed the door and engaged the deadbolt, walked to the door leading to the narrow hallway and found it was still locked. He thought he heard a giggle come from beyond the cubicles and wheeled around, but saw nothing. Someone was in the main office. He walked out from the foyer door and into the first row of cubicles. He inspected them, but still couldn't see anything. "Who the hell is that?" The lights were controlled by a set of breakers at the back of the building just past his cubicle. They were hidden in another narrow cubby next to the back window that looked out on a paid parking lot. The bank of lights above his cubicle suddenly went out, and the only light in the room shone from the street lamps. Tate's eyes were still adjusting to the dark, but he picked up movement along the back wall as it passed in front of the windows. Whoever was moving back there was coming from the panel side and was approaching the washrooms. He rushed back to the dark foyer and fumbled for the deadbolt. His palms were sweating, but mercifully he found it. He was frozen for a moment when he heard a garbled, slurred word in his ear. Then he pushed recklessly through the door, never even attempting to find the top step first. He tumbled down one flight and his face skidded across the floor at the bottom. For a second he could hear howl-like laughter until ringing in his ears drowned it out. He brought his hand to the side of his head as light crashed through the building, blinding him. As the ringing began to subside, he could hear laughter. There were voices, clear now. His pounding heart settled a little and his cold fear melted into fiery rage. O'Byrne propped himself up on one elbow, and pain flashed through it. He glared at the top of the stairs. A man stood above him with his arm around a woman. He was wearing blue jeans, a jean jacket, and a Tennessee whiskey t-shirt. She was considerably younger and wore considerably less. Both looked as if they dressed in the dark, and even as the man spoke, the woman was fiddling to situate her short skirt. "Hilk, you're pretty jumpy, eh, O'Byrne?" the man said.
"I'd say he is,"
added the woman.
"Serves the pervert right for trying to spy on us."
"Who's that? Spying?" O'Byrne said. He was still dazed from the fall, but recognized the voice from somewhere. The man had clearly been drinking and slurred his words, hell coming out, helg. He lumbered down the stairs, wobbled like a slowing top, and then braced himself on the railing. O'Byrne feared he might be moving in to finish him off, but he got to the bottom step and extended his hand. O'Byrne took it. The man pulled Tate up, wrapped one arm around his neck and pulled him tight. The man was deceptively strong, and his bicep pressed firmly against Tate's neck, making it difficult to breathe. "What the fuck are you doing here?" the man said, squeezing Tate's neck harder than before. It was then that something clicked and Tate knew the voice. It was Jeff Hanlon. "You're drunk, Jeff," Tate said meekly. "Well, me and Sierra might have imbibed a few. What's it to you? The smell of stale beer filled Tate's nostrils, and he pulled back from Jeff's grip. The bicep tightened again hard and pulled him back. The force made Jeff stumble, and both men almost went ass over a tea kettle down the second flight of stairs. Jeff, who Tate had gathered was an experienced drinker, was able to steady himself again. Then he pushed Tate away. Oh, pardonnez-moi, Sierra? Be Tate. Tate, this is my little vixen Sierra, Jeff said, curtsying toward Tate. The pair of them began to laugh, and Tate struggled to hold his tongue. His hands formed into focused balls of hate. The anger well was far from dry. It was nearly overflowing, and Tate had to empty it by the bucketful. Right now he couldn't dump the buckets fast enough. He feared the well was really a geyser. You can't just come in here late at night with some woman. This is a business, Tate said. Hey now, little buddy, Jeff said, wrapping his arm around Tate again. I can do whatever the fuck I want. I own this fucking building, and Jeff's drunken comeback was halted by light, hot and thick. It cascaded through them, and Tate could feel a tickle at the back of his throat like he had a cold. The tickle turned into pressure, strange pressure, almost like a finger. He realized it was a finger creeping out the back of his throat, wagging around and hitting his tongue in the roof of his mouth, twisting his uvula. He didn't know what to do. He tried to cry out, but his scream was muffled jargon. He looked at Jeff and Sierra. Their faces were distorted, their skin bubbling and popping with white pus. It labored down their faces in snotty clumps and into their mouths. Tate could see they also had throat fingers, each dancing a psychotic can-can. Then there was a voice, soft at first, then clear. The voice spoke to him for a few moments as he stared at the fluorescent lights. Through the translucent light coverings, he could see dozens of dead flies come to life and buzz upside down in some sort of undead insect backstroke. When the voice stopped, Tate could taste blood in the back of his throat. The light, which had been filling the room, condensed until it was the size of a golf ball. Then it forced apart Tate's jaw. He could hear it sizzle, and a puff of smoke floated to his nostrils as the ball of light melted away his tongue. The lights in the room went out, and there was only the scent of charred pennies filtering through ash from his ruined mouth. Tate fell to the ground motionless. And that's all for Episode 6, Chapter 8 of No Evil. Let us know what you think in the comments. If you like what you hear, please follow, like, subscribe, click the bell, do all the social media things. Comment if you made it this far. What do you think? Should we keep the story going? Does it suck? Are you super pissed that it even exists? Are you raging against the machine being this podcast, I guess? I don't know. Let us know. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the next escape.